I've been working on my old Unity project again, and this time I didn't add any massive systems. No new weapons, no new levels, no fancy graphics. Instead, I spent most of my time making enemies behave differently. And honestly, this might have had a bigger impact on the game than some of the larger features I've added in the past. One thing I've noticed while revisiting this project is that older versions of the game had a tendency to make enemies feel samey. Sure, they looked different. They had different health values, different sprites, different models, but a lot of them ultimately behaved in a similar way. And if every enemy behaves the same, the player's decision starts becoming automatic. The game becomes predictable. So I focused on giving enemies distinct roles, not by making them more complicated, but by making them create different problems for the player. The first change was updating the fighter plane. Previously, it mostly behaved like the bomber. It would fly across the screen, and while technically it was a different enemy, it didn't really feel very different. So I changed the way it moves. Instead of flying perfectly straight, it now flies at different angles. And if it gets too high or too low, it'll adjust its flight path to stay within a reasonable range. At first glance, this seems like a tiny change, but in gameplay, it makes the fighter feel much less predictable. The bomber is something you can plan around. The fighter plane demands more attention. It moves differently, appears in different positions, and keeps the player guessing just a little bit more. It's funny how sometimes a few lines of code can create a much bigger gameplay impact than an entire new feature. Helicopter, helicopter! The bigger addition was starting work on the helicopter enemy. The helicopter flies into the battlefield and deploys ground troops. And that's where things get interesting, because the player immediately understands what's about to happen. If that helicopter survives, things are going to get worse. More enemies, more pressure, more problems. After deploying troops, the helicopter sticks around and attacks the player from above. So even after it completes its main objective, it's still contributing to the fight. I really like enemies that create a clear sense of urgency. The player doesn't necessarily have to destroy it, but they're definitely thinking about it. Every second it remains alive feels like a decision. Do I focus on the helicopter? Do I deal with the ground troops? Do I handle the other enemies already on the screen? That's where interesting gameplay starts to emerge. Something I've been thinking about recently is that good enemy design isn't necessarily about making every enemy unique, as crazy as that sounds. It's about making every enemy serve a purpose. Right now, each aerial enemy creates a different kind of problem. The fighter plane creates unpredictability. The bomber plane is more of a nuisance. It's not especially dangerous on its own, but it does force the player to react. And the helicopter creates urgency. Destroy it now or deal with the consequences later. What I like about this approach is that the player is constantly making small decisions, and those decisions happen naturally. I'm not forcing the players to think. The enemy behaviors are doing that for me. A lesson I've learned recently while working on this project is that interesting gameplay often comes from interactions rather than features. When I originally started this game, I probably would have solved this problem by adding more enemies, more weapons, more systems, more everything. But now I'm finding that small behavior changes can create a surprising amount of depth. A fighter plane changing its flight path, a helicopter dropping ground troops. Simple mechanics. But when combined together, they create situations that are much more interesting than their individual parts. So that's the recent progress. The helicopter's coming online. The fighter planes are a little smarter, and the battlefield is starting to feel much more dynamic. There's still a lot left to do before the end of the year deadline, but every update is making the game feel more complete. And honestly, that's been one of the most motivating parts of returning to this project. I'll see you guys in the next update. I was back to work. The first change was updating. I'm not voice cracking. Good enemy design isn't necessarily. I can't talk. So that's the recent progress. The helicopters coming online. That line just sounds awful.